How did you get to where you are in thinking about money? Were you born with the silver spoon and your parents taught you all about investing in entrepreneurship, or did you have to come into that on your own over time?
Yeah, so I was not born with it. I think there's a perception in our culture that people are either born with money or they're not. And it's actually Fidelity Investments in 2019 did a study that actually found that 86% of millionaires are self made. So most people that are wealthy figured it out. So this whole idea of class warfare and haves and have nots, it's just not true when you actually look at the way things are. So for me, like a lot of people just learned about finance over time with how we were raised. My dad, my mom are both teachers. My grandmother's a teacher. My aunt and uncle are teachers. So a lot of teachers in there. The rich dad, poor dad mindset is like education is not bad, but it's sometimes that mindset of getting a safe job and just serving people in this way. It can be a bit limiting versus actually finding a way to how can I create value in other ways, and how can I use money as a tool to grow. And that money, even being in a religious home that I was raised, is that money's the root of all evil, or that money's this or that. And of course, it's funny that verse actually says the love of money is the root of it. So the idea of like greed is a very different thing than just having money.
Okay.
And so that's how I guess I was raised. I was very entrepreneurial growing up a bit. I had a paper route. I did little things here and there, try to make money. And then I realized, oh, if I work hard, I actually can benefit from this and I can use this. And so I think there was a pretty quick correlation for me. I wasn't really, there were four kids in my family, single parent after I was 7 or 8 years old. So it became, what can I do that I actually put effort in and I get results from that. And so that's, I think, a really great teacher about money is when you don't have a lot and you're like you can see the results of you doing work and you getting paid. It's kind of like that's a neat equation.
So, yes, and I think that many of us, actually, the majority of people that I know, learn to work for money. And that's where most of us stop is we work for money and don't take that next step of, oh, this thing, this money should be working for me. How did that transition happen in your world as far as investing it as opposed to just running the wheel like so many people do to make that dollar?
Yeah, so there's this saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I'd like to say I just immediately got that from a young age. And I was probably in my 30s. I'm 43, 44 now, but in my 30s, I started to realize I'm working, and I was actually in the medical field as well, was in medical device sales, mostly cardiology, radiology sales. And I made good money. I was making good money's relative, depending on who you are, but I was making 250K a year.
Mhm.
And I thought, hey, this is pretty good money. I'm not working too hard, but it felt like a grind. It felt like I can't take time off. I've got to show up to work. I've got to. So I started thinking a lot more about the idea of time freedom, right? That people say I want financial freedom, but really what a lot of us want is time freedom. And it's interesting in the US, particularly in the medical field, the average American takes 13 days off a year, including sick time. So we take very little time off. And as opposed to Italy, which the averages in Italy of how many days off people take on average,
No, what is it?
it's 42 days on average. So
Wow.
the average person takes 8.5 work weeks off, which is crazy. So I started to realize, like, I saw people that did real estate or other things, and I was like, man, I just want to, like, the lifestyle to me seems like a better lifestyle. And now I'm still working 40 hours a week, but I'm doing the things that I want to do. And I
Yeah.
think it's a tragedy that we're stuck into jobs or roles that we have to do. And we live, and I think I know you work with a lot of physicians and medical professionals, and it's challenging because we've got to pay the bills and we get into a lifestyle and we can't really find a way. But I think that the big epiphany went for me is I realized once I started investing or doing, I had a single family house that was generating a few $100s a month. And then I realized, well, if I could do the more of these, or I could do, and then I got to where I couldn't scale it. But I realized the idea of passive income, where Warren Buffett talks about that if you don't learn how to make money while you sleep, you'll work until you die. So the
Mhm.
making money while you sleep is you make money and then you go actually have that money work for you. So it's not dependent on your efforts. And we were talking before we started recording, a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to buy a house or two or whatever. And I realized that wasn't very scalable because I'm not valuing my time. And also there's no scale there. So then I started learning about the bigger syndicated deals like what you and I are working on. So
Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. You started buying single family houses. That was your intro, which is many of our intros into real estate investing is that single family house. And then you realize I can't buy enough of these. $100 a month passive income is great, but that's not going to move the needle as far as keeping me from having to go to work or taking that more time off from work when I want to. And you start realizing I can't buy a million of these to make it so that it works for me. So that's when you started looking at doing the multifamily type thing.
yeah, yeah. Again, I had a mentor show up. I had a small single family portfolio, had 4 or 5 single family houses. Some of these were in Cleveland, not a great part of Cleveland. And on paper, it looks great. And then you actually start seeing tenants not paying and things breaking down, the city coming over. So you get it. And so it just didn't work the way that we hoped.
Yeah.
And I'm saying you smile because you can't relate to anything I'm sharing
I
as well.
might.
Yeah. And so I had this grand plan of getting 30 of these houses, and I have a relative that I hadn't seen in a long time. And I know he was in real estate, but I didn't know what he did. And so I told him my plan, and he's like, "Well, that sounds like a lot of work. Why don't you do multifamily apartments?" And I was like, "Well, I don't have the money for that." And he said, "Well, you can raise the money." So I learned about syndication. So I learned about how to raise money. And so this was while I was doing my W-2 job, I was able to start raising some money from individuals, started to meet up in Los Angeles, and then found a partner, and we were able to raise, this was after about 6 months after I started. We started working together, and we raised about $15 million over the next 18 months. So it gave me a lot of experience to have a lot of phone calls with individuals, see what they're looking for, how we could solve them. And I didn't realize this, that we feel like we have money problems when we don't have money, but there's a lot of people that have money that have a problem. It's like, well, how do I grow this? And one of the tests, and this kind of going back to what you're sharing of like, if what we're doing is scalable, there's a scalability test that if I can't 10x the current strategy that I'm doing, meaning if I'm doing an online trading strategy, or if I'm doing options, or if I'm buying houses, and let's say I've got 3 or 4 houses, could I immediately go to 30 or 40 houses? Right. And of course, before your eyes bug out of your face, oh my gosh, that sounds crazy. Well, if you can't do that, you're not scalable. And a lot of times, again, we undervalue our time, and it just becomes another job. So I
Yeah.
think that's where I learned about scale. I learned about it's so much more efficient when you go after larger deals.
When you start raising money, so that sounds impressive, like I raised $15 million and I forget the time frame. But who do you raise money from? Who is
Yeah.
giving you money? And it sounds like, I was like, I'm going to hand my money over to this guy. And before he answers that question, you do it every month. If you're investing in your 401k, you're putting money into an envelope, into a suitcase, handing it to somebody that you don't even know who it is, and they're going to invest in that. So Bronson is doing it and talking to people in a different way to raise that money. Who do you talk to? That's a
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. Yeah, it still blows my mind. We've had investors. We had one investor that one time wire first time investing over $1 million, right? A million, like almost over a million. It's like that's amazing. That shows up. Wow, that actually happened. Somebody actually
Mhm.
invested in your thing. That's incredible. And I've never met this person. I've just through a referral or through other things. Now I have found again. I think there's two people that are listening. Somebody's like, "Yeah, how would I trust somebody that I've never met?" And
Yes.
somebody else would say, "Well, if I want to raise capital, how would I do that with people I don't know?" And I think the thing that I found is that by creating resources like what you're creating, or you've created a money with mission, and you've created your network and your
Uh-huh.
thing you're doing, what happens is people see you as a person of value. So whether it's a local meetup, it's something online, and it's really this one to many. You can basically do what you're doing and share with many people, and then they can say, "Oh, wow, Felicia, when she talks, I get that." And so people will resonate. And so when I have a deal, people will just suddenly say, "Hey, I'm interested in going for it." So somebody asked me one time, like, "How many calls do you make when you have a new deal?" And I was like, "Are you just hitting the phones?" And I said, "No, I'm really not, because I'm just constantly." It's like the idea of farming, right? You're just putting stuff out there in your farm. You're not like the hunter sales guy, like, "Hey, I need your money." It's
Yeah.
like, "Hey, I'm just continually watering and planting." And then when the fruit is ripe, an apple tree, you go and you do a tug. And if it, we've heard this analogy before, but if it comes right off, okay, that person was ready. But if not, you wait. So I think the more value you can create in the marketplace for things people are really dealing with, the more people will say, "Hey, I think this person has something that they might be able to help me."
Yeah, nice. Okay, rich brain, the habits. Let's talk about that a little bit because I think a lot of people come into investing without thinking about there's other things I need to do. It's not just about putting my money somewhere. That is
Yeah.
the end of the game. The end of the game is putting my money somewhere for it to grow for me. What should they be thinking about? What should you be thinking about before you even get there, before you put your money out there?
Yeah, so I think there's this saying, Robert Kiyosaki talks about it. He's like the be do have, right? Where it's we want to just have the stuff, right? We want to just have the wealth. People want to win the lottery. They want to have things. And that's the reason why most lottery winners, or a lot of them, end up going bankrupt or say their lives are worse off after they win, because they didn't really develop the character behind it. So the first thing is really to become someone who is a wealthy person, from the mindset, the way you view things, the way you view money, the way you view people and resources. And there's some mindsets around that. And the second thing is start doing the thing, doing the habits, the actions that wealthy people do. And over time, then you will develop the wealth, right? But again, we try to get it in the background. What's the quick fix? What's the
How
get
can I
rich?
have it?
And so I think it's really important to go in that order. So a lot of people think, okay, well, what's even in the middle of that? Well, what things do I do to become wealthy? Well, the first thing really is the mindset. You actually have to become a wealthy person. And so one thing I like to talk about is the idea of wealth worthiness. And this is a subtle concept, but it really is a worthiness component. Brené Brown, the author, who's amazing, she talks about the difference between people who receive and do great things in their life and those that don't are the first group believe that they were worthy of it.
Mm,
Right. So there's this innate sense that I'm worthy of having good things. Now, some people develop it over time. It's not like they grew up and, oh my gosh, I'm just worthy of having mansions and jets and whatever. But it's important to get that right. And there's ways specifically that you can help develop that, but it will manifest in other ways in your personal life as well. So let's say if, somebody's single or is a single guy, they'll say, "Hey, I see a beautiful woman. I'm going to go talk to her and say hello." But if I already know based on my self-talk that I don't feel worthy of it somehow, I'm going to, oh, she's not going to like me. She's not going to be,
Yeah,
okay. How's that conversation going to go? Like, probably
yeah.
not very well. Well, it's very similar with our wealth, and we don't think of it in this way, but we have a way of self-sabotaging. And
Mhm.
so one of the things of getting the mindset correct is to examine yourself, your worthiness. And then there's things that you can do. One thing that I like to use, I call them whisperings, but they're like affirmations, but they're things that you say to yourself. And there's things that you can create. Now, it sounds a little funny. Everybody, they say most people, almost everybody talks to themselves. But when we identify the self-talk being negative, we can change that. So instead of being our own critic, we can be our biggest fan. We can come alongside and really help support and really be someone who's really for us, right? Really supporting who we are.
That's really interesting, the worthiness. You have to feel worthy of having whatever you're wanting, your partnership, your relationship, your money, your financial, whatever it is. And many of us, because of our upbringing, however that was, whatever our, even if it was subconscious learnings, may not actually feel worthy of having the wealth. And we have our families. There's so much around. It's so interesting, and obviously, I'm taking it very personally, honestly. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, okay. And it does manifest in many different areas of your life, your worthiness component, your worthiness thought of yourself, how you feel about yourself. And
Yeah.
then so many of us don't even hear our self talk. You don't even hear it. And the majority of it does tend to be negative, at least in my
Mhm.
world. And I have to consciously turn all those things around. It
Yeah.
just is a thing.
I think for all of us, the human mind is very biased to the negative. I think a lot of times we do it, it's biased this way for survival. So we have to see threats and things when the lion or the bear is out there, have to make adjustments. Oh my gosh, the bear is going to kill me. So
Yeah.
what is it that, how do we change that? And again, I call it like the tapes that play in our head, right? When I was in middle school and I was awkward and whatever, and all these things, oh, you're no good. You're not going to do this. And I think this is a very
Mhm.
normal thing. Most people, I would say, that's generally something that's the standard. But so every morning I've created these whisperings, which are just different things that I wanted to create in my own life. And one example of this is I went through a divorce, unfortunately, 7, 8 years ago, came out as feeling no sense of personal self confidence. And so what I did is I started creating things like worded things that I would say about myself around that I'm worthy of
Mhm.
love and belonging, that I own the room I walk in and this is what happens. And like, just so that I could create that. So how we create these is really with our words, and as we say them, and as we visualize, and as we put ourselves there, and we keep doing it. It didn't happen right away. It's not like I say one or two times. And
Yeah.
this can be hard for physicians because it's like, there's a lot of data around this, but it can feel a little bit hokey. But what happens is I've watched myself and other people that over 6 months, over a year of doing that daily, those things actually start to come from within. And
Yeah.
that's where I show up now. And it's like, I can show up and feel like I own the room. I can show up and I feel like I've got something to give and I have something to share, and good things are going to happen to me because I've created it. And so this actually, I'll give an example of this. I've been saying to myself, I'm going to 10x my revenue in my business this year, or whatever. Well, we had some struggles and a couple of deals, a struggle or something. Where's this going to happen? Whatever. And then identified through a relationship, a partnership, we found a e-commerce business, and this partner's big in this space. And if we're able, we just went under contract or went under a letter of intent this week. And if we have a lot of diligence to do, a lot between here and there. But if this happens, this is going to be probably 4 to 5x the revenue in my business, right? So, but
Yeah.
because though I was already saying that, I was already visualizing, I was already seeing that, when it showed up as an opportunity in my life, it was like I saw it, right? I was like, I was able to see it. And that's where a lot of times we just go through life and we're going on autopilot. It's like 90% of life is just on autopilot. So the only way you create different things, you have to create the words and visualization of like what it can look like. And then you actually, when it comes around, like, oh, this is it. And so that's, I think, whether it's relationships, it's money, it's anything, it's just being able to create that ahead of time.
Yeah, it was really good. And for me, it is still a daily, mostly daily conversation with myself because I can feel myself getting down on something. Scarcity is a big thing for me. I can find myself getting into there's not enough money, there's not enough money, there's not enough money. And I have to best thing about it to me is that I can actually see it happening now, where sometimes you don't even see those things happening and you don't know why you're in this place. But once you can actually see it, you can now, okay, is that true? Is what my coach said to me when I said something dumb. He looked at me and said, now, is that true? And I'm like, fine. No, it's not true. And
Yeah.
you have to recognize in yourself what you're saying to yourself
Mhm.
and what you really feel about a thing to actually change it. So it's
Yeah.
that. recognition, that looking in to be able to make those changes. So it sounds like you're saying one of the things that the wealthy do or have is a feeling of worthiness to have what they have.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's creating the worthiness. Because again, if I have a worthiness that I believe I deserve good things, or I'm creating these things in my life, and then you step into those things, and there's a process to it where it doesn't just happen overnight. It's not like you just like you say one time, oh, I know the and again, this is where I talk about this. It actually works in a spiritual setting too. Like, for example, I'm in a men's group, and a lot of guys will say, well, yeah, I believe I know this is true. Like I know God loves me, or I know my family, but I don't feel it in my heart, right? So whenever you have that separation, that's a good sign. If I know it in my head, but I don't feel it here. So like I can say, oh yeah, I know I'm worthy of good things. I know I deserve a good relationship. I know I deserve to have wealth, but
Mm,
like you don't feel it. You're not. It's not actually coming from within, and
yeah.
that's where when you generate it, you can walk into a room, you can walk into a situation, you can walk in and you start to actually visualize it, then you're actually showing up with it. And that's I think that's the self work, it's the personal work. It's challenging, but I think the challenging part is just being consistent with like this morning I did. I was able to go through my 14 different sayings that I do and I just walk through them and I try to lean into those and how's this feel? And you can change them. And so you can continue to create things in your life. But yeah, I think it's definitely a practice. It's something that's work in progress. But I've watched net worth 20x over the last 5 years or something. And it's not always been a straight line, but there's been things good and bad. And so, but I think in general, I just feel like I'm able to step in that. I've watched these people that the data when I interviewed these people, it's like the same thing happened. It's like they were able to create that either intentionally or sometimes it happens over time. You see a little
Yep.
success in something and
Yep.
it builds a confidence and then it just grows over time. So some people wouldn't say I intentionally do these whisperings, but over time they start their self-talk and things start to change and they feel like they're worthy of it over time.
Talk about the failures or the things that didn't go so well. You do your self-talk, you feel like you are worthy, and then a thing fails. How do you deal with that, and what comes out of that for you?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's been in 2024 here. There's been some challenge, 23, 24. There's been a couple multifamily deals we've had that have really struggled. We haven't had any losses yet. We might have a couple. And that's been hard. It's been hard to have some conversations that are tough conversations. Of course, every investment we know it has risk and it's been hard. But I think what I've had to say is everything is learning. In my book, share a story about how years ago I was doing this options trading strategy and I was making money. I made like 20K over a few months. And then I ended up losing in one day, I lost $70,000, and that was over a third of my net worth at the time, and that was a
Okay.
bad day, so just feeling the shame and the disappointment, the defeat, but what I realized is people that and as I meet people, a lot of people that I know have lost a lot of money. I know people lost over $1,000,000 or have gone bankrupt or different things have happened,
Mhm.
and these are all educational experiences. They're all things that, like, they help us to grow and learn and become, and some lessons I've had to go through multiple times, right? I've had to kinda go through things, but
Me
it's
too.
just I know, and we all do. None of us get it always maybe there are people out there that do, but for me, it's been a process of just continually learning. So I've said, okay, well, for me, I could have gone and had a degree or whatever, but I learned I'm not a great options trader, right? There's other strategies that are great for me, and I'm going to focus on other private equity or real estate or other types of deals that really emphasize my strengths, and that's okay. So again, there's a great book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, and it talks about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. So she
Okay.
says the fixed mindset is, oh, this thing failed. So therefore I must be a failure or I must not be good, whatever. Versus the growth mind says, okay, this thing failed. Like it doesn't deny that, but it says, but what can I learn here? And maybe like I can do something different or I can do this. So I just look at like nothing happens like to us, it happens for us, right? Everything is learning, everything is growth. And so I really enjoy that.
That's that the whole thing about the failures. Every single real estate investor's had failures, every single one, and if you haven't yet, you will. It's just like
Yeah.
surgeons. Every surgeon has complications, and if you haven't, you will. It's because you haven't done enough, and it is about learning what happened. You're in a surgery, something happens, and you're just like, after you when you're out of the adrenaline rush of the thing, you can relive it and figure out, "Okay, this happened, this is how that happened," and you learn from that. It is exactly the same with all kinds of investing, all the other areas of your life. It is exactly the same. It's not that surgery failed, I'm never gonna do it again, or that surgery caused harm, I'm never gonna do it again. It's what happened? It's not a surgery problem. Where did this fall apart? And then fix it and go forward. The
Yeah.
exact same thing with all the other things in our life, and I think so many of us have a failure and then think that's never gonna happen. I had a big real estate failure, lost everything, credit score 500, this is crap.
Yeah.
And I realized, okay, this isn't a real estate problem. This is a Felicia problem. Let's figure it out and move forward. It wasn't easy and it wasn't without a lot of pain and distress. And you guys have heard the story. It was still learning. Those are the ones that you learn the most from. The ones you
Mhm.
lose a lot, you're like, okay, okay, I'm coming back from this. And that hurt really bad.
Yeah. No, it's interesting too. Like I would always choose just everything go well all the time in my life. But the
Of
things that
course.
have made me who I am, the things that haven't gone well, the things I've learned from that, oh, this thing, there's a lesson here. And then as I get older, it's like, it's amazing though, the connections between one thing and another. So I can go back to like, oh, I'm in this situation that feels like it's a different situation, but it feels similar to this other thing. I can pull from that experience. That's why you meet some people, not everybody who's older, but as people get older, hopefully there's some more wisdom and experience and things, and people can have a greater perspective. And but I think if we just have that growth mindset where just everything is information, everything is learning, we do learn way more when we struggle or we fail. And it doesn't, and going back to Brene Brown, her quote that we're all worthy of love and belonging just as we are right now. So whether I win or lose, I fail or whatever it looks like, it doesn't define my value, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a huge connection. You're a personal development person too, but there's a huge connection between personal development and success in life and business and other things. So
Mhm.
it's just keeping the worthiness there. Yeah, I'm going to struggle. It's okay. It doesn't change my worth, but I'm worthy of love and belonging. I'm worthy of great things. I'm worthy of worthy of all these things, even if I'm human,
It-
which we are. We'll
yeah,
fail. We'll make mistakes.
100%. So we talked about worthiness in Rich Brain. Give us another one that you learned from the people you interviewed.
Yeah, so I'll share one. So again, once you have your mindset, you're starting to not be your worst critic. You're actually your own biggest fan, which you could become your own biggest fan, right? You're actually it comes from within. You start to generate, you support it. Well, what do you actually do at that point? Because you're showing up in a way that you actually believe good things are going to happen. You're going to start to develop it. Well, what are the things you do? Well, one thing I've noticed that people, almost every successful person that I've seen, is that they have a commitment to learn almost as if it's another job. So, for
Mm,
example, Warren Buffett, Mark Cuban, Oprah Winfrey, a lot of these people, they read hours a day. They literally are just reading all the time. And these are some of the busiest, wealthiest people in the world, but they'll take hours sometimes a day or an hour or 30 minutes or whatever, and they'll just be reading all the time. And what is it about reading is it's a tutor that teaches us things that we need, any sort of skill, any sort of idea. And once you start reading a lot, you start getting convergence from this area to this area, from science to business to personal to biographies, and it's everything is very similar. Nothing is the same. We're seeing new things right now in the world, but there's really nothing new under the sun. Everything has happened in a different way before.
right.
And so a lot of people that I've seen that are very successful and very wealthy, they'll have, and it doesn't have to be books. It could be learning on YouTube. It could be going to conferences. It could be doing things. They just have this approach that it's a job. You don't get necessarily paid for it right away. But Brian Tracy will say, if you want to earn more, you have to learn more. And that's
Mhm.
why people are listening to a podcast, a great show like this, where it's like, I'm going to learn something that I didn't know. I'm going to come on this and hopefully I'll walk away with some real nuggets that I can. So I think it's just that idea. One thing I've done is I've created a reading goal each year. Last year, I was able to read 98 books last year. So my goal was 80 books, got to 98. This year, my goal is 90. I don't know if I'm going to get there. I'm working on it. But just again, having it almost like its own part time job. Because if I want to earn more, if I want to have a different mindset, if I want to be having a breakthrough in any area of my life, I've got to be a learner. I've got to be somebody who's continually getting new information.
Yep.
And it says the average American reads 12 books a year or less. 50% of Americans read 4 books or less. And then the average CEO reads about 50 to 60 books a year. Right. So there's a big difference. I think CEOs are very busy. So they're seeing it. People that are successful see a priority in learning and reading, in development. And most people don't.
Yeah. You don't have to experience everything for yourself. You can take somebody else. You can borrow experience from a mentor, and a mentor can be a book. A mentor can be the person that wrote that book without you ever meeting them. So learning from other people is reading a book, listening to a podcast. And sometimes I listen to podcasts sometimes very passively. I'm not actively trying to get something out of it. It's like, okay, this entertains me. And then it's over and I'm still thinking about it. I wasn't,
Mm.
I didn't go into it to learn something, but I did because it's making me consider something a little bit differently. So it doesn't have to be I'm going to listen to this podcast so I learn something. I'm going to
Yeah.
listen to the podcast because I want to be entertained. And I promise you, you're going to learn something.
Yeah.
Every single thing you're gonna learn something, whether it's a positive thing for your life or I'll call it a negative thing, which actually turns into a positive thing because you don't do it, makes it a positive thing. So just it is really, really about education and continuing education. And it sounds when you said you read 98 books last year, I'm like, oh my gosh, how did you have time for that? You do. It's like all of a sudden, oh, there's 98 of
Big
them
time.
stacked up over there. I don't know how that
Yeah.
happened. There they
Yeah,
are.
and a couple tricks, yeah, I do audiobooks, which I think some people say, "That doesn't count." I was like, "Well, it counts," and you can
Oh, it
speed them
does
up a little
count.
bit, and and I love biographies, and I don't do, like, 30-hour audiobooks or 1,000-page books. I do books that are I can listen to them in a few hours, 3, 4, 5 hours, or sometimes a little bit longer, but I think it's really good to have these habits because again, over time, there's a book by Jeff Olson called The Slight Edge, and The Slight Edge basically says, like, "Okay, whatever little habits you have today." I'm not a smoker, but if I choose to start smoking, that's not gonna kill me today or tomorrow. It's not gonna have a really much of effect for 5, 10 years, it'll be fine. Well, 20, 30 years from now, that's gonna have an exponentially negative effect. It's gonna be like
Yes.
an exponential curve versus if I'm doing positive things. If I'm investing in my health, I'm investing in learning, if 15 minutes a day of reading, whatever it is, these things are gonna have an exponential effect over time. And so that's where the habits, it says we make our habits and then our habits make us. And so if you want to change your life, it doesn't always matter today, tomorrow, whatever. But this is how people become amazing in a lot of different areas is they just invest in themselves first.
Yep.
And I think more than investing in any investment, like invest in your like learn, just really invest and make the decision that you're going to grow as a person and you're going to learn everything you can. And don't start with I'm going to read 90 books this year. Start with, hey, can I spend 15 minutes a day reading? Can I have a routine where I can do this in the morning or in the evening? And that's where these big things start. Is just start small.
And with for the moms and dads out there, your kids see you reading, that makes them read. You can't just go
Yeah.
tell them to read, but they see you reading and they will read, and you guys can sit and read together.